And for our keynote speaker for this day, we have a very esteemed guest. So he is a professor emeritus at the University of San Carlos in Cebu City, the founding director of the University's Cebuano City Center, serving from 1975 to 1996. He holds a PhD in literature from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and has served as visiting fellow at the University of Hawaii, University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin-Madison, University of California at Los Angeles, Kyoto University, and the National University of Singapore. A prolific writer and scholar, he is the author of numerous groundbreaking books on literature, history, and cultural studies. In 2018, the Philippine government conferred on him the title of National Artist for Literature. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome National Artist Dr. Russell B. Mojares.
And then tayong butag. Problems kind of reading the life is not right. So thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. Food, I need not say this, food is a pleasurable subject for study and research. We love to talk. We love to talk about food. Of course, better yet, eat. So I hope this is a conference that includes the eating as well. And it's a subject on which everyone has an opinion. A conference like what we have today, the forum, should be fun. I had my first acquaintance with culinary studies through friendship with the late Doreen Fernandez, considered the country's foremost scholar on Philippine food. But I am myself no food scholar. But I think I can talk about sources in research on the subject of food that would be useful for the conference. As a necessary historical background, I think a significant body of writings on Philippine food, something that accumulated only over the past several decades. And this has not always been the case. In the early 20th century, Philippine food figured in such courses as domestic science. I don't know whether that's the subject that we like that statement. Home economics and food technology. These are kind of fields where that kind of food would be part of the academic program. My wife graduated from San Carlos with a bachelor's degree in home economics. But I think this is a field that no longer exists. Right? I have not heard of there being a program in home economics today. What has kind of, in a sense, replaced it in terms of popularity is hotel and restaurant management, I think. And this was subject like food technology would be, or even domestic science would be subjects embedded in the programs of the colleges of education, nursing, and others. Fi- Food studies also figure in the field of anthropology as part of standard ethnographies of cultural communities, together with such topics as material culture, social organization, and so on. So we have books on food and culture among the also the Kidman of Mindanao and others. But the study of food never quite had the status of a discipline in itself. In the 1970s and 1980s, however, there was a surge of fresh interest in the subject of Philippine food. As a multidisciplinary field engaged in documenting and defining the country's culinary traditions, their formation in terms of the local and indigenous and influence of foreign culinary cultures. I think it is important to note uh, that what has been called, because this kind of what has been called the long 1970s, that the historian Vicente Rafael suggests something that spans the period from the last years of the 1960s and then the 1970s and the early 1980s. And so I think it's a useful label for that span of time, the long 1970s. And that was one of the most productive period of intellectual and cultural work in the Philippines. That's why I think we should all remember that when we think of the 1970s, we don't only think of it as the dark years of the dictatorship, but also one of the most dynamic intellectual periods in Philippine history. Because this was the time when interest in cultural nationalism was very high. And there was a great deal of excitement among people for particularly the study of the Philippines. And so the field of arts and culture was quite dynamic at that particular time. And this is indicated by the fact that this was the time when, like OPM, for instance, started, original Filipino music. The time when there was interest in the so-called independent cinema or experimental cinema with the in such kind of famous directors as Lino Broca, Ismael Bernal, Mike De Leon. So in various cultural fields there was a great deal of activity. So both in the academe as well as outside. So this is also like the time when there was, together with a lot of interest in ethnic arts and culture, this is the time when there's a great deal of interest in the study of aspects of Philippine culture, such as food. So this was, I suppose, also because this was the period when Filipino restaurants came into their own. Because Filipino restaurants actually, kind of a history of restaurants is very interesting thing to do in the Philippines. But in kind of, the early 20th century, even as late as the 1950s, if you were like growing up in a town in Mindanao, for instance, if you say, let's go eat outside, eating out, of course, was not quite the passion when you eat home. But when you go out to eat, restaurant is almost always Chinese restaurant. I mean, you don't have a Filipino restaurant because why would you go to a restaurant when you're going to eat food that you have in your own house? So you would have it in a public market, a carinderia, but kind of Filipino food did not have the status of being food that you do for like social entertaining or like kind of so Filipino food, if you take for instance of the restaurant business, became respectable and popular and kind of a lot of interest in reinventing traditional recipes. Only I think in this period, 1970s. I mean, I just checked that, for instance, Villa Mare, which is a pioneer in Filipino food, kind of fine dining. I mean, you don't think of Filipino food as something you find in a fine dining restaurant. But Villa Mare as a pioneer in this field was established in 1979. And popular Filipino restaurant actually kind of, popularized the idea of bistro or cafe. Cafe Adriatico was also established in the 1970s. So in a sense, Filipino food in this area became respectable rather late. And so side by side with that development was also the boom, as it were, the surge in studies about Philippine culinary traditions. So books would appear on the development of the country's culinary culture. Like Hilda Cordero Fernandez, The Culinary Culture of the Philippines in 1976. And popular food items Ed Alegre and Doreen Fernandez's Kinilaw, which is of particular interest in the Visayas because ours was as Ed and Doreen called it, a cuisine of freshness. So the book contains various recipes for various ways of doing inilaw. And then you have books about chefs and restaurants, like the book Larry Can Cook, how Larry J. Cruz built an empire that redefined Filipino dining. So this is the Cafe Adriatico and a host of other restaurants today, Cafe Lorenzo, and so on. And then you have publications that continued explorations of pre-colonial and colonial cultures. One kind of remarkable piece of work here is Father Rene Javillana's Global Exchange, glimpses of an 18th century colonial kitchen in Manila. So what has been preserved is a very detailed inventory of the Jesuit kitchen in Colegio de San Jose in Manila in 1768. And Father Ravillan is able to draw from just this inventory of the kitchen, what kitchen implements are there, and to be able to draw from it an idea of the food that was served in a kitchen like that of the Jesuits in the 18th century. So the literature on food has continued to grow. In the past few years, for instance, quite somewhat randomly, I found three examples of books that, in a sense, kind of enlarged the scope of food studies. One is a book entitled, I think, Discovering Tuba, which is about tuba, the production, marketing, culture of tuba, published, focused on the Lake Samar area. And then there is, I think, a book that is written by a group of natural scientists called Mapping Sago. and kind of struck by the book there, because even that's a subject that nobody really has worked on. Sago is I think it's one. It's called Landang or Kinugan. In fact, one of the articles, it's a collection of essays. One of the articles in Mapping Sago is about Sago in Argao, Cebu. And so, because we have forgotten the fact that Sago was kind of staple in colonial times, and it's kind of considered to be like kind of a hunger, kind of in times of famine. It is something that kind of people resort to as Sago, of course, is a staple in Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, and also in the Philippines in an early period. But people are not kind of uh, familiar with the subject now. So it's great that a book was written uh, about Sago. And then there's another book that I found interesting, which was published, I think, just this year, is the book by, I think he's Mexican scholar, Heriberto Tapoya. I think he's an anthropologist, entitled Packaged Food, Packaged Life. It came out just this year. And it's a well-documented study of the consumption of what he calls corporate food in the slums of Metro Manila. And the corporate food is referring to has become standard food for the poor, like Lucky Me, those packaged Lucky Me noodles. And so you have kind of, now those food like that, like packaged food like that has become kind of very popular. And his study is highly well documented and he attempts to arrive at a sense of what our conception of well-being is. Like for instance, in a place like the slums of Metro Manila. So the literature on food has kind of expanded. Here, I'd like to focus on because I'm talking about sources and references. On one basic source for food knowledge, the subject of cookbooks and recipe books, kind of practical how to do it manual for food preparation and cooking, and the value of cookbooks as a source of research on food. Recipe books, however, come in different kinds, and many offer more than just recipes. And if I do a kind of just based on the books that I have I have read or have kind of come across. Let me cite some examples. Kind of begin with the more idiosyncratic recipe books. One is a book entitled Dining with Headhunters, written by an American, Richard Sterling, which collects from the author's foreign travels recipes of the most quote-unquote exotic dishes that he had eaten. And there are, perhaps as a form of self-advertisement, that is kind of a well-traveled adventurer with a strong stomach. Or to appeal to readers who also have kind of an interest in so-called exotic foods. There are 4 Filipino recipes included in the book. One is, of course, you probably would guess, one is dinuguan, and the other is azucena, which is dog's meat. And the third is camaro, meaning of crickets or grasshoppers. Another book, and this one I think is even more interesting, is Recipes Out of the Believe It. And I won't forget this book because kind of I found this for Doreen Fernandez. We were in Ann Arbor. We were co-teaching in a summer institute of Southeast Asian literature. We were co-teaching the Philippines in for one summer in the University of Michigan. And it was an interesting program. But I think probably it was done only once because it was very expensive. Because the teachers, it was meant to be, it was a course for teachers, professors, university professors from all over the U.S. Kind of selection. Like, so we had probably like something like 20 students, and they were in various fields. And the whole idea there was to get like people teaching Southeast Asian history and courses on Southeast Asia to integrate into their courses literary texts. That's why it was a summer institute of Southeast Asian literature. And Doreen and I co-taught the Philippine part of the institute. Anyway, we were invited to spend weekend in the house of Morton Netzer. He's a bookseller in Detroit, and actually the leading distributor of Philippine books in the United States. But kind of he and his wife passed away years ago. And we were in his bookshop, cellar bookshop, and I saw this book, Recipes Out of the Believe It, and so gave it to Maureen. In fact, Maureen later on said to people that I am kind of eagle-eyed when it comes to spotting interesting books, because when we go to bookstores, I'm usually the first to find, a great book. So I saw this and I gave it to Green because I know this is her kind of book. And what makes this book rather interesting is that it's not really a recipe of food eaten in the Believe It prison. What kind of food do you eat in the Believe It prison? But this was published in the 1940s, after the war. And so Believe It was full of American prisoners of war. And the author here is himself an American military officer who was a prisoner of war, I suppose because he had the time, they were in prison. So undertook this personal project of collecting recipes from prisoners as to recipes of food they fantasize they really would love to eat once they're free and back home. And so it's a very international recipe book. In a sense, kind of recipes of food that they dream of, because given the starvation diet in the prison, he must have been kind of thinking about the food that they ate when they were home. So that's actually it's a collection of recipes done by the prisoners. And I think the compiler here did around 100 recipes. And so the book is a selection of these recipes. And so it's not so much kind of great in terms of like really recipes, but I think it's rather poignant because there are also bio notes on all the contributors, and many of them actually did not survive the war. So it's kind of a unique recipe book. Actually, there are four dishes there that are Filipino, all written by two American officers, a father and a son, who were long-time expats or residents of Cebu. And so they contributed Filipino food. And you learn from the bio notes, but the two of them did not survive the war. So interesting recipe books and those that combine recipes with personal, family, and social histories. Heirloom recipes of old, well-known families have an interest because apart from food, we have an insight into the social and cultural world in which food and food practices are embedded. An early example is, for instance, a 19th century collection of recipes, the recipes of Juliana Guricio Pardo de Tavera. I heard years ago that they were planning to publish it, but I don't think a publication has come out of that. Because Juliana Guricio of kind of the well-known Pardo de Tavera family uh, preserved her recipes. So this is a box full of notebooks and loose paper that are the recipes of Juliana Guricio, which is now in the P.S. Pardo de Tavera collection in Ateneo, Manila. And apparently there are notes as part of the collection, which in fact will tell you that Merced Rizal and other notables had dinner in the Pardo de Tavera home in Paris, because they were living in Paris for many years as exiles there, the Pardo de Tavera. And so you would have data like on such and such a date, there was dinner there, and who were the guests. And you would have people like Jose Rizal and so on. So I don't know if that would be the oldest or extant recipes, Philippine recipes, but it makes it interesting also because they were living in Paris, so that you have an insight into like how Filipino food is cooked in Paris because they had to adjust to what ingredients were available there. And of course, the personal note here is Juliana Guricio Pardo de Tavera is the mother of Paz Pardo de Tavera, the sister of Trinidad Pardo de Tavera. Paz married Juan Luna, and Juan Luna murdered his wife, Paz, and mother-in-law, Juliana Guricio Pardo de Tavera. So it kind of makes for an interesting collection of recipes. A most informative book, and I suppose this is something that people should be aware of, is a recipe book entitled Appetite for Freedom, the recipes of Maria Y. Orosa. A remarkable woman, Orosa, who died during the war in World War II, was a pioneering food technologist. That was her training. She was a food technologist who, when the war broke out, joined the anti-Japanese resistance and died during the war. But her contribution is that she invented a lot of kind of dishes, recipes for food to meet the needs of a hungry population because of the war. And so using available and cheap materials like cassava or coconut. And so she invented dishes for food that would be cheap and available during the war. In fact, Maria Orosa is considered to be the inventor of banana ketchup. So that is one of the dishes that she invented. So the Orosa book contains some 700 recipes done by Maria Orosa. But the best cookbook that I read is Cocina Sulipenia by Jean Gonzalez. And because it's very well done, Jean Gonzalez is a well-known chef. And he belongs to the wealthy Arnedo family of Pampanga. Jean is, I think, the brother or nephew, I'm not sure now, of brother Andrew Gonzalez, who was president of La Salle University. kind of, and so the book is about, it says the family kind of heirloom recipes, going back to the 19th century of the Arnedos when they were in Sulipan, which is a town that no longer exists. So the Arnedos were sugar hacenderos at the time when sugar was kind of a boom industry in Pampanga. Pampanga was the first center of sugar production in the Philippines. So the families that were, the landowning families were extremely rich. In fact, they said that some of them would kind of get French cooks from Paris to be family cook.
Oh,
And that's why, like, kind of the French influence is evident in Kapampangan cooking. And Pampanga has built up the reputation as the food capital of the Philippines. But it's a great cookbook because it contains a lot of details about the family, about the town, and so a lot of details about the culture surrounding food. And so you have interesting details there about food preparation. For instance, one item I can't forget is that when they have prepared chicken for lunch, for instance, like an hour before they start cooking, they would send one of the servants to catch a chicken and chase after the chicken round and round the house because it said that adrenaline makes the meat more tasty. So you have to like kind of exercise the chicken before you kill it because that would result in a more flavorful meat. But I don't think there are still people who do that today.
wala na tayo. Wala yung lugar talaga.
Anyway, to I hope I still have time.
Yes, yes.
And just start to go to the last part of my presentation. The challenge, however, is not just about finding sources. What is important is to stress that much will depend on what the student or researcher is able to draw out of the materials at hand. Because I see that to be a problem. They have the text, but they don't have the imagination or the kind of the skill to be able to see in the text things that are in fact quite useful. And so this can be illustrated by one book. And I will cite the example of what may be the earliest Cebuano cookbook. Maria Inday Fadolion Viuda Viralius's book, Nagnak sa Pag-Agluto, which the copy that we have, and I think is the only extant copy, was published in 1923. But actually, Inday Ralius says in the book that there was an earlier edition that was published in 1913. But I don't think a copy of that edition survived. And so she came up with a more enlarged collection of recipes in 1923. So that's what we have. Ralius was the wife of Florentino Ralius, who was the municipal president, or today mayor of Cebu from 1899, I think, to 1907. So at the beginning of the American period. And Inday Ralius was an accomplished person in her own right, enterprising, like reference to how she traded in root crops, owned a sinamay store, this native textile, operated at one time Teatro Conquera, or what became Oriented Theater, and then was also into the construction business because he constructed for lease a house type called chalet, bamboo chalet, which was very popular among Americans in the American period because it was perfect for the type of house that was perfect for the tropics. So this was one of the things that she did. So quite a kind of active, enterprising woman. And she was civic spirited, perhaps active in having the first women's club in Cebu at the beginning of the 20th century. So the book Labda, written in Cebuano, contains around 550 recipes, mainly uh, kind of part of it is Cebuano food. The other part is like kind of international food. Even the international food even has a recipe for hamburger. So, not early. So a number of observations can be made about the book. One, you're struck by, like in the early 19th century, there was a great deal of interest in kind of cosmopolitan cuisine and kind of a lot of kind of teaching and publishing of continental or cosmopolitan recipes. In fact, the Values book is quite similar to a book that a copy which I also have, which is Culinary Arts in the Tropics, which was published in Manila in 1922. It's kind of the same range, kind of in a sense a focus on Western and foreign food. Now this is understandable since the early cookbooks were meant for an urban, modernizing, and somewhat socially upscale leadership. Now, the target of these cookbooks. You probably imagine that the ones who used this were people who were interested in social entertaining rather than using recipes for home cooking. Kind of finding friends and this and kind of they serve food like this. Because I suppose that was a time when kind of it was more fashionable to serve Western food than to serve local food when you have guests, special guests in the house. In this respect, the Ralius cookbook is interesting because written in Cebuano, it specifically addresses Cebuano women. And that's its kind of target readership. And does not only introduce them to a wide range of international dishes, but puts a premium on local dishes as well. And it is quite democratic because it has specific recipes for poor households, you know. If you're poor, I mean, these are dishes that she would recommend and you can use. In fact, she has dishes with titles like Dinaginot, cooking Dinaginot, which is like kind of concoction out of leftover food. And then there is a dish called Pansit na Binukin. And there was what is Pansit na Binukin? And actually it involves also sasaging sapa, kind of cut into like thin strips. So I suppose they would look like noodles. And then you add like 5 centavos worth of tanghon in real noodles. It's very specific, 5 centavos worth of tanghon. And then subakan of what isda, the kind of garlic, salt, sibuyas, also you have pansit, mga pinukid. There's even, I guess you also have like a recipe for getting kabos. So kind of, she said, this is like this that are specifically kind of addressed to kind of households of modest means. And clearly, Ralios is not just interested in food, but with ideas of good home making and self-improvement for women. And this is actually the main motive driving the book, kind of teaching women kind of home management or something like that, as well as to kind of improve their skills so that they are useful to not only their family but society. So her book, which she dedicates to her grandchildren, does not only include tips for does not only include kind of recipes, but tips for setting a table, food presentation, table manners. No? So this is early 20th century. And she offers detailed, practical, and perhaps for today's readers, quaint advice, as in a section entitled Napulo Kasugo Bahin sa Pangluto Alang sa Babae, which opens with the admonition, labaw sa tanang dapit sa imong balay, higugmaa ang kusina. Kay maoy sandikanan sa maayong lawas sa imong panay, og sinugdan sa daghang nagimot. So kind of kind of virtues of working hard, being thrifty, and so on are very kind of prominent in the book. And she also has a section entitled Napulo Katambag Alang sa Asawa. It's interesting book. And what you kind of to part of it. Because you'll find this very earnest and kind of commonsensical advice. But today, if you read them, they would be rather amusing and quaint. Like, napulo katambag alang sa asawa, and she has 10 items, and let me read 3.
10 lang.
Ayaw hikalimti nga tao ang imong bana. Because this is addressed to the woman, the wife. Ayaw hikalimti nga tao ang imong bana o dili balanon. It's a kind of not a saint.
May isa po yan.
Usa
Kala na
ayaw
bana.
ikalibulong ang iyang kapuyan. What's the
Ay, ito kayo na. Author.
he has another woman kind of be patient with him because amo lang siya dili santos.
Yeah.
Another, ayaw paghisgot kanunay o sapi sa imong bana. Ikaw na lamang ang mahibalo mag-igo-igo tutok sa iyang makita. So that's kind of the ideal one. You know? Another one, kung magtuok ikaw nga ang imong bana walay kasing-kasing, hinumdumi nga adunay tiyan, o pinaagi sa mga pagkaon na maayo nimo ang pagkahikay, musayon ang pagtandog sa iyang kasing-kasing. Through the stomach. And I think these are kind of rather familiar pieces of advice that today today's readers probably will find this rather amusing. So what is kind of very clear in the cookbook is this is not just about cooking food. You know, it's about like keeping a good home, a family, being useful in society. I mean, so that's kind of in a sense the kind of the driving theme, as it were, of the book. That's why I kind of keep recommending this to people that somebody should write about this recipe book because maybe they all just Cebuano recipe, and it's interesting for providing you insight into a particular time in our history. So to conclude, there can be more in the recipe book than just the food. Although, I was thinking when I first read this recipe book that it would be interesting to have people kind of cook some of the dishes here because they may no longer be known or cooked. No? So it would be kind of, you'd have a Cebuano food festival and you pick some dishes here that you no longer have today. So what is wonderful about the Radio's book is that it's not just a collection of recipes for food, but in a way, recipes for a particular way of life as well. So, datang salamat, that's it.
So thank you for that fantastic speech, Dr. Russell Muharas. And now we will be having our first open forum where you are given the opportunity to ask a question to our beloved national artist. So if you have a question, kindly raise your hand so I can come to you and Troy there also with a mic. So students at the back, lang mag-array. And so if you have a question, kindly raise your hand and please state your name, your profession, and your university. Thank you. And now.
Daghang salamat ug congratulations, Sir Resil, our beloved national artist, pride of the Visayas. I am Joyce Dorado Alegre. Ed Alegre was my husband. I just finished editing his recent book, which won the National Book Award. And one of Ed's regrets is to interview you comprehensively. He said he wanted to write this book, Landscape of the Filipino Mind. I still remember that I am so privileged to be listening to you talk about writing about Philippine food, which is his first love. My question, very practical, sir. Kung sa imong favorite food? Oo, nga no, man.
And one part of the kind of but I don't know. Like, yeah, one dish which I had just 2 days ago. All by myself, I had lunch in Bukab because I saw the advertisement that they had a new dish in their menu, which is Marawino, like something like it's about Marawi. Marawi beef rendang. And I like beef rendang, but you don't easily find it. So they used to have beef rendang in banana leaf in Ayala, but that restaurant closed down. So that's why when I saw that Bukab was offering beef rendang, I decided to try it. So it's beef rendang Marawi style. So that I like. Actually, I was asked that question as well in a conference in San Fernando, Pampanga. We had a conference on food in San Fernando, Pampanga. And that was a great conference because being in San Fernando, Pampanga, it was as much about eating than listening to lectures. Anyway, kind of somebody asked me the question of what my kind of favorite food kind of. I was thinking of like, well, so I said that I grew up in the Polo of Zamboanga del Norte. And kind of the food that I can't forget because it's something that is not quite common. It's one Camilo. You know what Camilo is? That's a kind of worm, shipworm, kind of rotting mangrove trees, you know. So, so Camilo. And then I said another one from my boyhood is paho. The small mango, because that is also popular. In fact, I'm kind of rather pleased, for instance, to know that when Jose Rizal was exiled in Dapitan, he would send jars of paho to his family in Laguna. So it kind of, I generally like unhealthy food because it seems to be the tastier kind of food. That's why, like, I'd love to talking about food, saying, where in Cebu you can get the best bambako. And well, Matias, I think they have the best bambako. And for instance, I would go there, it's 4 o'clock, I go there because at 4 o'clock, that's when they serve balbacoa. And the thing about balbacoa is that you have to be first in line because if you're late, all you get is skin. And you don't really get the choice. So, and then, and then recently, kind of developed a taste for inununan. So, and then so I go to this restaurant in SFP because I got in there that serves good inununan. And speaking of inununan, and to illustrate the recipe books that have a political meaning as well, is a recent book entitled, you've probably seen this, by I.E. Marcos, entitled Peanut Best. That's the title of the book. You have that in National Bookstore. Peanut Best, which is supposed to be like kind of food from the Marcos family kitchen. So there are 3 sections. And the first section is Ferdinand Marcos's favorite food, which is of course the Ilocano. And then the second section is Imelda's favorite food. And the third is Ivy's own favorites. And Sheila. And hers is kind of international cuisine. But Imelda's is interesting because apparently, according to the cookbook, Imelda's favorite dish, which she loves to have at home, is inununan. Inununan. And so, kind of the political message there of the book is like that film that IB produced, is to show, is to reinvent the Marcoses. Don't think he was lonely. He was just kind of a person like many of us. Like Imelda, don't think about her 1,000 pairs of signature shoes. I mean, she was a simple Visayan woman who loved her inununan. So, kind of in the sense that kind of is it's not just a recipe book, it's part of the reinvention of especially because this book is not really, not really recipes done by Amy or cook in the family. She had a family friend, Spiras, who's a chef, and actually was the one who made recipes based on probably what she was told about the food in Marcos household. So, so that's kind of one of the flavor of Pinununa, or what the Tagalogs call aksiw, no?
Thank you very much for that question, Ms. Alegre. And we will be entertaining one last question from the audience before we proceed to our next segment. Sir? Good morning, sir.
Good morning. I'm Val Salares from University of San Carlos, from the Department of Biology. Sorry. Thank you for that wonderful talk. And I would like to ask, is there any existing reference with regards to the use of certain indigenous plants in various recipes? Most especially because as apart from the culture of using these plants getting lost, perhaps even these plants are also getting lost. I mean, if I make sense, you mentioned the paho na manga. So that paho is now even used to refer to a certain variety of kind of commercialized mango, when in fact originally it refers to a native species of mango that grow on very tall trees and the smaller plant. So it's
Yeah, that's why like one of the books I mentioned is important, the one on sago, because it's done by actually kind of it's kind of people in the sciences like biology and so on. It's kind of a very actually kind of scientific study of sago. Goes beyond just the kind of biophysical kind of analysis of the plant. Also deals with the economy and culture of this. I recall I had that once when I was a child, because it's kind of sago is like kind of the palm tree, no, buri power, and it's the starts in the pith. You know, you have to break the ground open, and that's what, and that's kind of, in fact, another good experience that I had. I was in Bandar Seri Begawan in Brunei, attending a conference, and I was with Doreen Fernandez, and I think Rio Almario. Rio Almario. We were in a conference, and that one evening, Doreen brought us to the public market because we wanted
Kaya
to
wala pa po kung wari
kind
mo, random to
of the local food.
crowd.
And we came to this kind of restaurant inside the public market that serves sago. And that's the first time I had it. And of course, I went and it was like kind of paste, like kind of alcohol looks like kind of it's white paste. And so, but yeah, and if we need to kind of revive, and of course, in the subject of food in general, kind of the loss of many species has deprived us of, you know, we could no longer like say, what does like kind of wild boar taste, or like kind of you have like kind of either animals or plants that are already extinct. That means that's one kind of experience of having that is something that you no longer have. So, so that's but the article I mentioned by Father Havillana about the 18th century kitchen of the Jesuits in Manila has kind of a listing of this is kind of very detailed, like kind of native as well as kind of foreign plants that must have figured in Philippine cuisine in the 18th century. based not just on the inventory, but on sources that have SINA and, so on, where you have kind of references to foods that are indigenous, as well as the, of course, foods that come from kind of plants that came to the Philippines from Mexico or Israel.
Thank you very much, sir, for your question. I think that's our last question for today, so I'm very sorry. And thank you very much, Dr. Russell Muharis, for your wonderful answers. And today, I would